Hey there, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Simon here. We got Nick on the line as well. Hi, Nick.
Hey Simon, how you doing, man?
Doing great, thank you. As
Excellent.
usual. Hi, Stephen. Hi from Toronto. Many of you are coming back again. We appreciate this. Thank you. And you know the routine. We're just getting up and started. And everything looks and sounds good. Thanks, Kent. Kent's our official tester. And in fact, we got
Awesome.
a new thing. I'm just going to send you a poll because we discovered, in fact, I've known this for a while, but the GoToWebinar software has the ability to do polls. So just before we start, I was interested which particular version of, if you're using Creative Cloud, which we'll show some things in After Effects today, which particular version you're using. Is it the latest one? Do you like to keep up to date, or do you need to make sure that you have access to different versions with your team members? So really, that was just a question that occurred to me, and I'll leave it up for another few seconds or so. And about half of you have voted so far. But it also helps inform us, making sure that we have the right tools being compatible with the right versions. So that's my real reason of asking, but just to find out really. And some people use older versions for at work, but the latest ones with personal account. Thanks, Kent. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting balance. Hang on, I'll close the poll and then I'll share the results. Here we go. So as I thought it might be, lots of people are using the latest version, which is also good because as they've gone on incrementally, I've seen that the different versions of After Effects certainly and Premiere have been faster to process. So it's quite interesting. But also, this has been a nice mechanism to help figure out that actually all the tech is working and you can hear me and see me. So we can officially start now. So welcome. I'm Simon Walker. I'm Director of Training at Maxon. And I'm delighted to welcome again Nick Harauz, a Master Trainer in a whole variety of different applications. Welcome, Nick.
Hi Simon, I'm glad to be here. It is I'm actually coming from Toronto, Canada, so it's not my holiday today. I know it's you're out in Portland, right? So it's great. It's Memorial Day to do this on such an awesome day.
Well, yes, absolutely. And thank you, everyone. I know it's a holiday day for you, thank you for tuning in. It's interesting when you plan these things weeks and weeks ago, months ago, and then you completely forget that there's a holiday. And then I'm in the States, and then I realize there's also a holiday in the UK. So apologies for that, but thank you for coming in on your day off.
Yes.
And also greetings from Newcastle, Jay. Excellent. Nice to see you again. So we're going to be running through some techniques for fake UI graphics. And I'm just going to bring up this web page again. I know I mentioned it before, but this is the central hub for these series of webinars because it lists all the ones that we've got coming up. And also you'll notice here that it also lists the project files that we talked about on the previous sessions. So if you missed a previous session, you can just click on the date and then it will watch the replay. You'll see it'll look like a registration screen, but actually if you click through that, you'll get access to the recording. And then you can get access to these download files. And I think we got some more that we can share with you later on during this session. And also I better add this link to the chat window, hadn't I? That would be sensible. There we go. It's on the Red Giant website, redgiant.com, and just go to blog and then just go down, when you're there, go down to the demystifying webinars. Great. Okay. Hi, Logan. Thanks for joining us again. And let's just kick off. I'm going to switch over to you. Here we go, Nick. Let's set you as presenter. And as usual, please let us know if you have questions as we go through. Just chuck them in the questions box, as some of you are doing already. And the idea really of today is to run through some projects and to give you some tips. But I think if an unofficial title would be building blocks, because these fake UI things that we often have to design sometimes are really important as part of the story, and sometimes they're helping the story. And it's a question of how much time you have to spend doing those and as making them look good as well, depending on how much time they're going to be on the screen for certain things. So that's one theme that we're going through. But I can see your screen, Nick.
That's great. And I'm just actually moving my current time indicator. I just wanted to make sure that everyone can see me in close to real time versus there being any lag.
Yes,
So do you guys see me dragging my
I,
playhead around?
I can. Why don't you click on a menu and say when you're doing it as well?
Okay, I'm actually going to click on the animation menu there at the top. Do you
Great.
guys see that?
We Yeah, we got you in real time. Last time we had a 15-second delay, but now you seem to be pretty up to speed. So real time. Excellent.
Um,
Okay, I shall switch off my webcam to save some bandwidth, and over to you, Nick.
Amazing. So I have a couple examples to show today, and these examples are quite robust. We're developing a lot of elements, specifically in the Red Giant overall collection and suite of tools. I would say primarily using Trapcode suite as well as Universe, which I think are both optimal suites for building heads-up displays or heads-up components, not to mention just fake UI interfaces. Before I begin, and I wanted to show kind of a great trick that I think should be used in form, I wanted to just go to my one-page keynote, which just has a little bit of advice on when you're building heads-up graphics, and to add to what Simon said as well. And a lot of the times, Simon, like you mentioned, these fake UIs are supporting elements within a scene. If you're starting to build them and you have access to the Red Giant tools, one recommendation I have is after this webinar, find some online examples of an inspirational heads-up display or fake user interface and start to try to recreate it with the tools at your disposal. On top of that, I think a really big point to bring home, which I want to try to demonstrate, is to think procedurally through the building of these elements. A lot of the times, these are um, flat graphics that make up the majority of the user interface mixed with 3D graphics, but they tend to be used over and over again. So in my opinion, Simon, the more that you can save with the tools at your disposal, whether it be After Effects projects, After Effects animation presets, universe presets, which are cross-platform, these building blocks and saving them out are going to save you so much time as you continue to build more and more motion graphic interfaces. Of course, you can use it again. And last thing, we can also look at saving these in the presets in the designer. So heading back to After Effects, and I can go back into some more of my tips. One thing that I wanted to focus on right here with this proxy enabled is specifically this earth map. And I created this with Trapcode form, Simon. And the reason I use that is I think it is a main building block when it comes up to heads-up display. So I'm going to first of all come up here and just turn this off so we can see the actual copy and not the proxy version that's playing in my timeline. And we're going to create a version of this earth from scratch, but there's a really handy tool to do this within Trapcode form. So let me hop into a new composition. I'll call it earth. And quickly inside this composition, Simon, I'm creating a new version of form. And under my effects menu with my solid layer selected, really simple, of course, in adding this under the, I am drawing a blank. There we go. There we go. A version of form. All right, so I've got a version of form, and we see that these particles are static here on the screen, and they're little spheres that are stuck to this grid-like pattern. And before anything else, if this is the first time that you're exploring here, you can go into the designer and literally up to the preset section where there are a bunch of shape grids which could help you with your heads-up display or fake user interfaces, because they're literally replicated shapes used over and over again throughout the pattern. Now, specifically when it comes to building a spherical type grid, or let's say component for your heads-up display, what I used for the earth is a sphere layered. And by default, you get 3 copies of it in Z space. But instead, what I did was just chose to have in the sphere layers just one. And then this just one layer, which has little spherical particles, I use this to reference the map of the equirectangular map of the Earth. So let me choose to apply this. And the trick to this is to actually grab a flat map, an equirectangular image. And there's a ton of these floating around which are for free, including on NASA. So this is my flat equirectangular map. There happens to be a ton of these other maps for other planets as well. And inside a form, in order to reference that map, I want to head straight down to the layer map section. And under color and alpha, what I'll do is choose to reference that flat map. Now you can start to see really a faded look here, but in fact, this is in fact mapping particles to that equirectangular image. And the real trick here is to go back up to the base form where you have your particles in X, Y, and start to dial these up to taste. So Simon, I'm now referencing 400 and 400, and we can see a clear image of that Earth mapped really easily. What I want to mention is that NASA is a great resource for texture or 3D maps as well. So when you're building heads-up displays or fake user interfaces, a lot of the time, Simon, what I do is I see an image of several planets within the display, and this is a great way to kind of get a UI-like layout. Now, this was combined with several other things, but I did want to make a mention to this. And then combining this specifically with one tool, which I think is absolutely necessary when it comes to fake user interfaces in a lot of different styles or techniques. So I'm going to add quickly an adjustment layer.
By the way, Nick, you're faking the this 3D layer, if you like. It's so easy, or it's so cheap to do, I suppose, in terms of time. And you can wrap it around all the other elements, not just the 3D the sphere, but because you've got OBJs in form, you can wrap all sorts of different shapes and have these things rotating around logos if you've got them, and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and it's just basically you choose the amount of particles you have, and automatically, you have that UI interface look. And usually, I would say, let's go with about 60% of the time, you want to now take this UI look and you want to damage it. So this is where
thing, isn't it? Take all your beautiful graphics and make them look terrible.
Yes, exactly. So you get a great, beautiful look, and then you'll notice it looks too clean. And this is where Universe really excels. In terms of having optimal graphic or fast processing of all of the effects within here, they're graphic enhanced. And you can add simple things such as from the stylization category. And by the way, for those of you who are new to this, I brought up this Universe dashboard that works inside of After Effects as well as Premiere. And the great part about this dashboard is it's available right on installation from under Extensions. And now I can search this entire category of effects without being blind, I like to say. Inside of After Effects, the only problem with looking under Effects and Presets or adding an effect from the effect menu is unless you've played with the effect, you have no idea what it's going to do. Here inside of the Red Giant dashboard, I can see previews of how this is going to affect my form-based world. And I'm going to come in here and add to the adjustment layer this Prometheus-esque look. You can see there the amount of distortion and damage caused to it right away. Automatically, this might be too much for taste. And at the very bottom of the effect is a super simple control, which allows you to blend with the original layers. Because this is an adjustment layer, it will blend with everything underneath it. And you can dial this up or down to taste to get the look that you desire. And then you also have these two main controls for more damage and how often the amount or the damage amount is happening. If you start to dial into, Simon, the effect controls here under effects, you'll notice that several parameters such as colorization, glow, and secondary glow are all checked right now and involved in the creation of this look. Let me just dial that back down so that we can see it a bit better. And one great way to become familiar with this is to turn off various values such as glow and secondary glow to become familiar with what's involved with Holomatrix, not to mention go into a parameter that's active, such as colorization, and look at the various settings that's right underneath that checkmarked area in order to, let's say, dial back colors or looks, or dial back your distortion and glitch damage. So
I
that was
think
the
this is a
first
good
example.
point. Sorry, Nick. I think this is a good
No,
point to make because the wonderful thing about the Universe dashboard, and by the way, in answer to your question, Aidan, Aidan was asking, no, it wasn't Aidan, sorry, it was Rodney. I've got a whole list of questions here, forgive me. I'm
so
talking about the dashboard, and he plans to get that incorporated into Final Cut Pro 10. We've got the dashboard inside After Effects working with these animated previews and also in Premiere. And that's largely to do with the HTML5 technology that Adobe have in their floating panels. You also got the ability to view these presets in hosts like Resolve and Avid, but they don't work in quite the same way because of the way that the software is set up. And so we're talking to everybody about making this as good as possible across all the different hosts. And so yes, we are chatting to the Final Cut people, but that's a great question actually, because it would be nice to have identical panels over all the systems, but because they're slightly different in nature, then there's some trade-offs that we have to do. But what I was going to mention is that presets have a bad name. I mean, we've all seen, especially in Magic Bullet Looks, which is particularly guilty of having fantastic presets that people apply and then just run out. And sometimes when I watch telly, I'm just playing Spot the Preset. But what Nick was just talking about here, I know I did
that's a
one.
great game. Spot the
I,
preset.
yes, exactly. I designed a lot of the presets in Looks for previous versions, and when William and Kate's Wedding came out, I noticed that the BBC used one of my diffusion presets on there, so I couldn't watch it. I was just looking at the preset. Anyway, when Nick's talking about these presets inside Holomatrix, I think a really good point is in the effects section where you can twirl down and then you can uncheck those effects. Then if you can get 80% of the way there and then just tweak it, then you can make those things customized, and then you can make your effect look like a customized version and not necessarily look like the preset. So I think that's the best way to use them. And it's tempting to think, oh, if I'm going to use a preset, is it going to look like everything else before? But they're quite a nice way of visualizing different effects before you actually apply anything.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what you're saying, Simon, even just tweaking it this much, if I'm building this out, and this might be different FUIs that I'm building across multiple projects, it's at this point, once I have a look that I'm okay with, that I'm going to save a preset. And saving this is going to save this to the Universe dashboard. So I'll call this prom tweak, just so that we can know that it's from the Prometheus effect that was tweaked. Once I press OK, and actually scroll over here inside the Holomatrix preset effects, which are there are quite a few, at the very bottom, you're going to see this now as a preset. I might even take this a step further and mark this as a favorite, which will make this even easier to find in the Red Giant dashboard. Another note to this is it's not just
Sorry,
saved in here, right? So
just while
Simon,
you're talking about this,
yeah,
I know you're going to say this. Sorry, I don't mean to talk over you,
no
but
problem.
we had a couple of questions about saving presets and where they live, certainly in form, and I think it's good, and also a good point to mention where these are saved on your system for Universe too. But before you leave this, Nick, but hold that thought. Would you
Yeah,
mind just showing your interface? I know you've got one element here of the Earth, but would you mind showing the whole design?
I'm back.
Because Rodney had an excellent question
Sure.
about Darby. Looking at all my lists are so close together. Sorry, Darby had a great question about how you approached laying things out to make them not look like they're all crowded together and make them visible. And what would be
That's
your
an
design
excellent
approach for that?
That's an excellent question. So usually I'll in these type of designs, I will have some sort of guidance in terms of the direction of how someone would like to look at it. So uh, Simon, I will usually sit and try to composite elements, and then I'll try to pick, in many cases, like a frame of reference or something that I want to be the main part of the screen, while everything else will remain to be supporting elements. After that, it's a lot of playing around with size and look, and in some cases, what feels right after you've designed the original layout. I am still playing and tweaking with this, Simon, just to let you know, but I knew that in this specific example, I wanted the earth to be mostly the focal point of attention, while there to be several other assets there that some cases, just the opacity of those feel like they're deeper in the background, while others are lit more or have more glow effects to sort of make this feel like this is a multi-layered look. I also found that adding a gradient is one element, but the other thing that I'll mention about this specific build is adding like a grid-like floor. And speaking of presets, Simon, this is a preset from Trapcode Mirror, right? Which has actually some pretty amazing grid presets. And I took some of the distortion effects as well as the fractal field effect on here to affect the way that this looks. So I made, I would say, about 5 or 6 tweaks in terms of how long this was, along with played around with the grid look to which was defined slightly by this repeater section. And then from there ran a fractal through this. But I thought that this added a little bit of, if I unsolo that grid element, a little bit of depth to the composition. But having a frame of reference can be really helpful. I store all my frames of reference on Pinterest. And then by dissecting these designs, that's how I help visualize, okay, how do we separate the items that are here in the screen? So one element is just doing.
Okay, so I'm trying to time in with the end of your sentence. Since we're
Sure.
talking about visualization, I've got something that we could sneak in here before
Great.
you get further on into talking about where the universe and the Trapcode presets are located.
And I'm just handing this back over to you, Simon, so you can show that.
Okay, let's grab this. Because inside form, the interesting thing is that you can very quickly get lost in a particular design. And in fact, let me just show you here. Here's I'll play it back, but then I'll scrub through slowly. This is a fake UI design that one of the designers at Red Giant, I think it was Leo who came up with it. Apologies if it wasn't you, Leo. But the thing I wanted to point out here is, where are you looking? And there's a whole theory of color and colors combining together to help you focus on where your eye on the screen. And also we've got things like a slightly blurred edge so that the attention is on the helicopter in the middle of the shot. And one of the techniques that we see quite a lot is when you're using elements and you want people to be looking at a certain thing, it can get too busy. So if I just switch back to After Effects, classic thing to do is if you've got something like this. So inside a form, let's say, in fact, I'll just reset this and go from scratch. Let's say I'm inside the designer for form, and I just jump into, say, an OBJ model, and I'm going to choose that spaceship from the inbuilt library that we've got inside form. And it's down here. Here we go. And the thing about them is, hang on, let's make sure that we can get some decent color for this together. And also on the particle, I'm going to make it blend mode add, so it's not just one color. There we go. That makes, let's sample this, make it slightly lighter. Here we are. And zoom up the size of it. But if I rotate this spaceship, let's say I had it really zoomed up and I started to rotate it, as it rotates around, then all the detail in the rear of the spaceship is lost, or rather it's causing a big jumble on screen. So one of those concepts in terms of what's visible on screen, I think is useful to mention, is the fact that you're causing your audience to see where they're looking. And so inside this example, what we could do is we could turn on one of the opacity maps, and let's just choose one of the presets. and we've got opacity map from back to the front. Let's switch that around. So now when we're rotating it around, we're not quite concentrating on the rear of the ship. We're actually concentrating on more of the detail, probably towards the front, because we've got the wireframes more described in the front, if you like. But that's when you can just jump in and you can start to reduce down how much of this curve that you wanted to affect the background or the foreground, or maybe even go the other way around. You want to access the middle of it, and let's just bring down this end point at the end there, so we can bring down the brightness of those front forks, and maybe apply attention to the center of the frame. So that's quite an interesting one in terms of where you want people to look. And there's another quick little example of creating these elements visually. Let's just go back into Form, open it up in the designer. And I'm going to cheat by loading a preset that I had previously prepared. Here is it under single form presets. And then turn off this opacity. Here we go. So reset this. This, by the way, is a very simple box grid with 1800 and by 970, and we are animating these individual boxes with a fractal field, and that fractal field is animating their opacity. But notice this, it's animating the fractal strength over a radial. So that technique that I just mentioned, where you've just got that limited to the background. So if I set that to off, then it's doing its fractal strength over the entire image. But if we didn't want to distract people too much, or just add a slight bit of energy into the scene, you can just add that to the edges. And also, if you wanted to have a background area, then it's interesting. You want to have some detail in the background, but you don't want it to be too distracting. But you want to have some energy so that the design looks a little more complete. So that's why in this example, then we had an extension of that concept where we're using the radial opacity as well. And so Chad Perkins put this together on a previous webinar that he ran for us. And this is just one of those background elements that I thought was a really simple way of just adding some detail in the background. By the way, a question from Darby, that notice on the helicopter final video, there was a grid in the background. Grid looked like it had wide squares and circles on each connecting line. What's your method to go about generating that? Did you use Mir? You could use Mir for that, but in this particular case, it was using Form. So let's just jump back here. Form, we used the multiple systems in Form to create two systems, one with these lines and using the strings, and one with the dots based on the grid and just plogged on top of each other. In fact, this is pretty much all Form, because if you notice down at the bottom here, there's this turbulence field where we're pretending this is an element from the interface where we've got these box strings encased in a square. If we jump back over into Form and just go into the designer, there's loads of building blocks inside the design just to help you create these things. So does this look at all familiar? This is exactly that example that we've got in that. Oh, where can I superimpose this over the top? If I bring up the QuickTime player, here we are. So that's the, I can't bring them two at the same time, oh well. But that's the example inside the window on that frame. And in fact, let's just look at a couple more of these things here. The city here is one of the preset OBJ files. This is a preset in the top left-hand corner. And a lot of those bouncing elements in the bottom right are actually parts of the preset in Form, because in specific answer to your question, Darby, the nice thing is the multiple systems in Form, if you jump into multiple systems and go down to heads-up display, you can get a good example of this type of thing that I'm talking about. And this wasn't exactly that example, but it shows the same concept where you've got different forms driven by the same fractal animation with different particles, which then, as well as the straight lines, which then allow you to bring these whole things together, which is quite an interesting setup. Cool. So I'm going to jump back over to you, Nick. because I know we got so many different things to share, but let
Yes, that
me send it over back to you.
I got to tell you, it's amazing what can be done with some of the form presets and just minor tweaks, and how much you get out of the designers in both form in particular available to you. But specifically for fake user interfaces, form being the main, I think, driving force, just because those particles remain static on the screen. And Simon, if you look at, I don't know if you agree with me, but if you look at the spherical fields and the fractal fields that you can add, as well as the disperse animations, everything is set up for what I like to call an oscillating animation. So it's pre-designed for your images to be remaining static on screen the entire time, which is perfect for heads-up displays. A lot of the times, most parts of the interface aren't going to disappear per se.
Yep. And Conlon makes a good point actually about why not just use a PNG that you've created if you're not animating it. And I found that what you said, Nick, is absolutely right. The slow oscillation, so you can have some energy in the design, is really good to be able to do in something like form. But also, if you've got a static background and you just want to tweak it, I found it's very quick to set those static backgrounds up. And maybe you want to add an extra few lines or take some away. It's quicker than perhaps creating it in Photoshop. But you're absolutely right, Colin. You can do it in both, and you can have that as a graphic in the background. I don't think that there's going to be too much in terms of resources for lines like this because of the GPU acceleration inside form. So I don't think you'd see a big hit on your render times.
Yes. Because everyone see my screen, by the way? I wanted to
Yep.
break down the saving of what I thought is super useful inside of After Effects, connected elements together, as well as take another look at saving for cross-platform. There was someone who mentioned there in Final Cut, and if they're ever working with someone in After Effects or Premiere, there's something amazing about working with Universe and Form and Trapcode. So I wanted to just break down this small example here and show, let everyone know that the majority of these elements were made with HUD components. So I'm just going to bring that up from the red giant dashboard here. It's located handily inside the HUD component, the motion graphics section. And HUD components is a collection of, let's just say, shapes. And we'll focus on this one shape here, or the preset. But this one shape, in some cases, is replicated. In other cases, there's just a lovely pattern that creates it. And in other cases, what's amazing about this effect is that it auto-animates, meaning that you simply switch some parameters and all of a sudden it's going to start moving for you. So it's perfect for fake user interface design. Speaking of presets, yet again, if you single click, notice that in this HUD component selection, of all the presets that are available, there's quite a few. And some are, I would say, some fantastic stylistic creations, such as this target. And I want to make sure that I'm going to update the right HUD component that's in my project right now. But you'll see it here. And in some cases, if we start off with these projects, let me just make sure to turn off my music. I'll just scrub through the timeline just to show that this is actually indeed moving in time, which is really, really cool. Taking a further look at this, this is made of several elements. So I want to mention that element 1 is an arc. In this case, element 2 is the crosshair in the middle. I'll just turn it off so that you can see, or we can focus on the arc here. And I'll just turn that off to show you that there's a third element that's down here, which is yet another arc. Through my discovery, Simon, especially with playing with this, I have to tell you, the arc is extremely, extremely powerful for HUD components. I would say it's probably the most effective element out of all of them. Although if you look at the browse element, there's quite a few to choose from. The reason this arc is extremely powerful is that arcs have their own options. By default, they lie around a circle with a specific radius. And if you start to play with this segment angle, you'll notice that my arcs are in fact getting smaller in this particular example. There are several of these because there actually happens to be your ability to take one element in a HUD component and then replicate it. So let me just choose 0 so we can see that's the original arc that this design started from. And then by simply cloning it out in terms of its position and slightly in its scale, you can see here that you have this amazing replicated arc pattern here for your heads-up design. And I can't tell you how many times in the last few weeks, Simon, I've seen an arc somewhere in a fake user interface. It's pretty much everywhere in heads-up display design. And again, I think it's one of the most powerful elements in this heads-up display components because of its ability of having separate controls from some of the other shapes that are included in that category. Regardless, this really speeds up heads-up display design. So if you're using After Effects shapes or PNG files, I think the two things you get with heads-up components is your ability to auto-animate, along with your ability to easily replicate in a fashion specifically meant for fake user interfaces compared to other replication methods. Now, usually it's a combination
you mentioned
of both.
that, Nick, because when you've got a second, I won't interrupt you now, but when you've got a second, I've got an example about how you might use a design that you made in Illustrator versus how you might use arcs like this in heads-up display.
So and that's awesome. And so you have all these presets, and I just want to say that I played around with the arc to come up with 3 unique kind of circle shape animations that are spread out here. So there's replicated patterns in each of these heads-up display graphics. I'll just turn this up, but this is a fairly robust comp. And in it, there are these auto animations with each of these head components, which are causing them to rotate. So I just want to go to element 1 and show you that right now, the animation is set to orbit 2D and is controlled by a certain speed, which is a speed of 4. So that's causing this first element to rotate to the right. Now I want to show you the powerful thing about this, because I tried to make it procedurally so I could use it again, is that I used a simple expression to have this element rotate in the opposite way. I'm just going to show that expression here in my project, or let's go EE. Hold on, I'm not sure why it's not showing. Okay, hold on. Let me just go down into the element and, oh, it looks like it's not.
Still have your proxy on, have you? Oh,
no,
okay.
I have the proxy that I can show after for sure. In the original design, it looks like it's gone away. I actually attached this animation speed to this, okay? And literally all I did was option click this bracket and then use the pick whip to attach it to the previous animation type option here, okay? And that presents me with a variety of controls. So by default, it absorbs that effect. In fact, if I kind of just name this here, HUD components, which stands for the first one that's in my project, that should accept. And all I did after that was enter a times value of -1. And this causes it to now spin in the opposite direction. The cool thing about this, okay, is that this is all savable to After Effects. So these brackets, this design, which is spinning the opposite direction of this, and this, which is spinning the opposite direction of this, can all be saved together by grabbing these, going to the animation menu, and choosing Save Animation Preset. And now you have a collection of HUD components. By the way, you have to save this in a very specific area. On a Mac, it happens to be your Documents folder in your After Effects files under the user presets for it to see it. And you'll already see that I have a couple of these saved to the library. But if I remove this effect and then head into my animation presets under user presets, this is all one saved item. I actually just added it. Can you guys see that that was added again? It's going to save you time in the next animation or design where you can connect multiple things together procedurally and then have one animation value that's auto-animated drive the entire collection of HUD components in After Effects. Now, to
Excellent.
mention, if you're also going cross-platform, I have all of these presets that you save to the Red Giant Universe dashboard or into Universe can also be opened in another application that supports Universe. And Simon, you'll have to admit, with Universe, there's quite a few applications that you can access the suite of plugins. One of those includes DaVinci Resolve, but not to mention Avid and Final Cut Pro. And I'll show you here, it's really small, but here's a collection of just some simple HUD components, and this was a preset that I saved. And I'll show you, here's a version of HUD components. And automatically, because I'm working on the same system right now, all of the custom presets I've created are listed down here. Cross-platform saved effects to help make it even more procedural in terms of your workflow. So that's what I wanted to kind of show, or at least talk about the procedural nature of it, Simon. Why don't I hand it back to you, because I know that you have something that you wanted to show as well.
I do. So
I can then hop into some other examples I have. Oh,
I
cool.
just wanted to bring up the concept of where these presets are saved, and we talked about some of the presets in that we were saving as custom presets. So when you on a setting inside Universe, when you hit the save preset, they are saved inside the Universe dashboard panel. But I just wanted to show you where they are saved. They are saved in the documents folder of your system. So in document, doesn't matter whether it's Windows or Mac, it's in the same location. And these are binary files, so they're transferable. So that some of the presets that I've saved into this area are ones that are just taking their names from whatever the effect was that I wanted to achieve. But 8-bit quantize, for example, which is like an 8-bit effect. In fact, I'll show that I've got an example about, it's quite interesting to do retro FUI, not necessarily modern ones. And there's a nice little Universe trick for that. But if you are saving these, you want to transfer them to a different system. The way is just put those presets inside this folder, and Resolve or Avid or Final Cut or Premiere or Magic Vegas Pro or After Effects, all the different hosts of Universe will pick that up. And here's a little tip: if you want to have the thumbnail that is recorded when you hit save preset, which is the playhead or the frame on which the playhead is located when you hit that save, then make sure you save the thumbnail with the same name, and then that will turn up as a thumbnail or as inside your Universe panel. Or in fact, if you're in Avid or if you're in Resolve, it will show that thumbnail as you're using the preset. And also, the other thing I wanted to mention was where the Trapcode presets were saved, because it's a slightly different location. So let's just, in this case, I'll just do it on this example. I just turn this off and just go into add form. This works the same way for particular as well. And if we just jump into Designer and go under presets, it's a slightly different way around of going. If you right click on any of the presets, then those will show in the Finder or show in the Explorer. And when we click on Show in Finder, then it takes me to this particular one, which is inside the application support inside the library folder on Mac, but I think it's in the core data folder inside Windows. But they're also a binary file, so you can switch and mix them around and transfer them from one system to the other. Now, the thing I just wanted to mention, by the way, lots of comments in here saying, you've got way too much content for this 1 hour, guys. Please, can you make this a series? Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. That would be very, very interesting and very cool to do. So we'll plan on doing that. But for now, we'll do more of these speed training techniques, things that we think that will be useful immediately. But that's a great suggestion. Thank you. One of the concepts I think is also useful for knowing is, when do you do your own stuff and when can you use these automated tools for doing stuff more quickly? And this is an example, one of a series of examples that Leo from Red Giant put together. And this is created using this Circle UI comp, which has actually a whole range of Illustrator files set into it. So if I reveal these inside the project, then they are layers inside this AI file. And lots of these are animated using expressions. Here's just a simple wiggle expression. This would answer the question of if you wanted absolutely something specific, then this is a fantastic way of working because you have custom ability to design whatever you need. However, there is a role, I think, for things like heads-up display, because if I just like turn on heads-up display here, and in fact, go back into my effects, turn off form, turn back on HUD components. This is a preset in HUD components. Let's just choose a preset, go into the dashboard, and I chose, where was it? Just one of the general ones towards the bottom of the list. Here we go. There it is, small graph 1, which has, as Nick pointed out, the ability to self-animate. It's got some animators that then automatically then either repeat or oscillate or blink, settings like this. So one of the things I've seen people use a lot is getting the heads-up display elements to be in position to see, does this sort of design work, without having to spend a lot of time doing prep work in Illustrator or Photoshop. So that's another routine. I've also seen people tweak these enough to be able to actually use them on end results. And a common feature request we have here is, wouldn't it be great if we had a custom layer set up for this? So although you have many individual elements where you can choose for an overall preset, or actually you can just choose from a series of these individual elements, then I think there's a trade-off between doing something which is absolutely custom and which is more or less unique enough because you've got access to all these different settings. So there's a couple of different approaches there. And there's an extra comment on those about how you might use that, because in another universe plugin we do have a custom layer, so we're taking this on board. So it's useful to find out those requests about improving this. But another thing I wanted to mention was the concept of using multiple different tools together. And there's a tool inside Universe that I really like called Point Zoom. And Point Zoom uses it's like Shine, if you like, if you ever use Trapcode Shine, and in the way that it's creating this kind of light ray. And we had a question right at the beginning. Could you just refresh us? This is from Darby. Could you just refresh us what a proxy is? Essentially, a proxy is something that you can set up from a comp inside After Effects. And if you right-click on a comp, and you can create a proxy so that you can just scrub through it, especially useful when you're doing pre-comp, so that you don't have to render every single element of the pre-comp beforehand. And that's all you do. You just go in here and select movie. And then that's what that little box switched on here means, is that when I'm scrubbing this effect on the screen, I'm actually just using the pre-rendered proxy file rather than having to do a RAM preview. I mean, you could do RAM previews, and After Effects is reasonably good at being able to remember the disk cache, although I seem to be doing this thing more often than not, just trashing the disk cache because I run out of space. That's a whole other topic. But in any case, that's what proxies are. And I just wanted to point out two things. One, what Point Zoom is, which is it's the ability, let's turn off the proxy here, the ability to just use a reverse point, so that if you were doing something like Shine in reverse, where you can choose a point where you can then just illustrate as if this was being projected from a point in time, maybe a digital projector or something like that, or a hologram even. And by the way, Shine is the opposite. Shine takes that point and then allows you to then manipulate. Let's just go to Shine and get the right point here, and then be able to change what the actual location of those light rays are. So it's like an opposite shine. Anyway, that's all background because I wanted to show you this. That is quite useful for fake UI. This, by the way, is an animated version of that just zooming up the text from scratch, so you don't have to have it as static. But what's quite nice is if you kind of completely fake things. So heads-up display is a 2D effect. Although you can rotate the effect with 3D parameters and make it look like it's in 3 dimensions, it's actually a 2D flat effect. But if you turn that layer on to be a 3D layer and animate the camera, you can then overlay something like point zoom. And in this case, point zoom is quite interesting because it automatically picks up the colors of the element that is animating, and then really does look like it's a projector from a different angle. So it's maybe even a holographic projector. It's a complete fake, by the way, because all I'm doing on point zoom is just animating the keyframe for the actual point and having that as a layer on top of all the other layers. We've got a link to this project file, but I just wanted to show you that if you are combining things together, then you can create these interesting elements even before you throw on a holomatrix or glitch onto the top of them. Great, I'm going to cast this back into you, Nick.
Excellent.
One eye on the clock. Here we go, make you presenter.
I noticed there was a comment in the thread about kind of heads-up display or fake user interface design from feature film. So the design that I have in front of me was actually, it was inspired by Bladerunner 2049. And if you do a search online for Bladerunner FUI or Territory Studios, which was one of the main providers for all the heads-up display graphics, they have a wonderful article and breakdown of how they visualize these elements, including doing a lot of macro photography, which influenced the overall texture and look to the design. I just took a still in many cases and asked myself, okay, well, could I replicate some of those elements using the Red Giant suite of products, primarily both being Universe and Trapcode, and the same remain true. So I thought I would kind of break down a few of these items just so that you could see them, and then show you the kind of final piece. And one way to do that would be, of course, to first of all, close out my proxy, and you can sort of see the copy that I have here. There's a few more added elements. I've started to turn off some stuff, which is why it looks a lot different right now. So at the very bottom is a really simple gradient effect from Red Giant Universe called Spectralicious. I will say that this is available under the generate categories, and there's quite a few gradients for you to choose from. When you look at them by default, Simon, sometimes you're like, oh, what's the value of using that over, a gradient inside of After Effects? So let me just show you that in the soft gradient background, if you actually selected this as a preset, this isn't only a gradient, it's a gradient with built-in textures, which I think are just amazing. So I can add that and automatically I get a gradient with a texture like that, not to mention controls for switching that texture. With Spectralicious, what I love about it in particular is if I select the effect and turn on my view options, I'll just show you that this specific effect just has separate on-screen controls for playing with the gradient, which allows you to have a lot of fluctuation in colors between light and dark. And these on-screen controls go a long way, not to mention with the ability to mix in a various blend mode. Now, just above that is an effect, which is a relatively new effect in Universe. I think it came about 2 versions ago, Simon. It's under the motion graphic category, and it's called the ray gun. A ray gun is amazing because it basically builds these awesome shape grids and shape effects. And by default, when you first see it, it includes a line grid mixed with a shape grid. And you can combine it with something else called cell grid. I will say from playing around with this quite a bit, the shape grid is the most powerful section because it gives you so many different ways to replicate and create shape patterns, which is fantastic for UI design. If I just go into one category, I want to draw a parallel, first of all, with HUD components, which is The shape grid has up to 4 shapes that you can add to it. And like a lot of Red Giant products, if you go and choose a shape, rest assured, there's a whole on category of shapes. Some of those shapes were these like hex quarters, almost like honeycomb grids, which were part of the displays within the Blade Runner 2029 film. So I pretty much just referenced 2 of those. And I would say that one of my favorite controls, while meant for affecting the various sizes and replicated patterns of shapes, are these effector settings. And that just allowed me to kind of carve out almost like a vignette-like pattern with these shapes, which remained on the edges of my screen and sort of mixed together with the gradient background. Now, just above that, I added 1 layer of texture, which was another soft gradient background, sort of mixed together with this, followed by a vignette control, which is just a regular shape layer in After Effects. And then I actually relied on one of a tool within Trapcode, which is called 3D Stroke. The magic of this is that you remember this one, right? It's like, and now it's just like totally forgotten, but it's like this awesome builder specifically for generating patterns of shapes. To build this design was super simple. I literally just drew a stroke with the pen tool or a mask on this layer, and automatically the 3D stroke saw it. Now, in order to kind of create this pattern, I did a few things, but one was just enable a repeater to repeat this shape, 15 instances of it, and then added these really small randomized properties. One was the Y displacement value. The other is, if you look at the scale X, it's super small, 100.2 versus 100, which creates this pattern of a slowly increasing decreasing shape over the pattern. I mixed this with this opacity effect, which is just creating a blinking pattern across the entire stroke. I then took that and replicated it on the other side for a slight different pattern, and then added these built-in After Effects strokes. Actually, these are also 3D strokes. And what I loved about them specifically was the fact of adding a radial gradient to them. Just above that is kind of the bulk build, and to sort of show this, because it's being affected by lights, I'm just going to turn on the lights overall here at the top. Inside a form, I think a super powerful effect that we've covered over multiple weeks, Simon. Let me go to the strings here, where as your base form, you can have box strings as the setup. And I literally just changed the X, Y, and Z values. With that, played around with the density and some remaining scale values, and then had these lights sort of within the time that I had illuminate this. And I have to say that it was very fast, so I could spend more times using these lights to illuminate these strings. And that was done specifically using a section in form called shading. Turning it on is going to have it use those After Effects lights and create a look to it. So I did that and combined it with an optical glow look, and then added 1 layer, which I saved later, all as a preset. And this, what is awesome about this in particular, is it's literally just a series of After Effects strokes, all referenced by a 3D stroke. I then used various versions of Universe's number effect. I didn't have to, but it does give you an ability to auto-animate it over time, which is pretty cool. And I used Universe's hacker text several times here. And spending time, you can actually link one animation value to all of these in order to bring them all together. So the rest is kind of the same sort of replicated patterns or built up of shapes, followed by a texture effect at the very top, just using Universe's texture, followed by 3 distortion effects, or actually more than that, a very small version of Universe Misfire to give it an old film look. I'll just turn these on and off. followed by holomatrix, but not so strong. VFX Suite's optical glow to give this an overall glow look, followed by another version of texturize to give it some more texture. And then one of my favorites, which is to add some RGB distortion to the overall heads-up display graphic. And this is under the distort category. Best thing to do is to choose a preset that's really strong so you can see the effect, like Heavy Viewfinder. And you can see that RGB separation clearly. I'll usually add one of those effects just to make sure it's working, and then go into the values and start to play with the red, green, and blue distortion, bringing them usually the scales of the red, green, and blue scales closer together, because that controls how much separation is between each of those channels. So that was.
I love this concept. I love the fact that you're using graphics as if they were filmed through a badly fitting lens, and also as if they were then transferred onto some stock film footage from the 60s. It's excellent.
And this is actually missing, Simon, just one value, and I think I just undid something one times too many before I sent this out, but I actually had this awesome effect in the blur category. Is it in the blur category? No, it's not in the blur category. It's in the stylized category, but it's a stylistic blur. Help me with the shrink ray. And what shrink ray does is just literally creates a blur at the top and the bottom of your image, kind of like a tilt shift effect. And I love it. This default animation is not helping it, but it adds kind of a mask to the top and bottom of the image, as you can see here with this gray overlay. And then you can choose the amounts of blur on the outer edges of this. Let me just turn off this mask view. So you could also use this to draw attention to your overall piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, yeah, I have I'll just play this back because I have a proxy. And this was kind of some of the subtle animation that took place. And I mean, if I had more time, I would play with the sides of the 3D stroke and really bring out the fade-in effect to make it much more subtle.
I like this approach as well, Nick, because you've got the combination that they did have in the film, of course, where you've got high tech and retro happening at the same time, just because of when the original was made and what we're looking at now at being able to create. So it's a very interesting thing. And as Darby says, gradients, grain, and also texture make all the difference of these things. But you've still got a color combination going there. You've got this color saturation with the oranges contrasting against the green, so there's some clear definition too.
Oh, thanks, Simon. And I don't want to play around with, you know, on the Bladerunner film, they spent a lot of times manually photographing macro textures to add to the layout. So that added a level of user-defined believability and interface that took it to another level. But mixing it, you know, with the built-in texturize effect, you get these awesome textures, which are, you know, can be used as building blocks. And then you can mix that with potentially textures you either find online or that you shoot yourself to create some incredibly realistic composites. If I remember correctly, Territory wanted a really organic feel, so doing macro photography of like dust and dirt really added to the overall kind of grime of the glasses of this, you know, technology that seemed to have been left behind in this apocalyptic future.
Future steampunk, the kind of treatment. Yes, lovely, love it. Hey Nick, we better wrap up because we're just about up to time. Whilst you hand
it back over to you.
Yes, please. Would you mind finding that link that you mentioned? Because that would be quite useful to post into the chat window.
Sorry, the link to, say that again?
Well, the link to the article you read about Territory's work.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely post that, and you guys can have the keynote with a couple of points that I've set up. And I mean, I built this project from scratch, so I'd be happy to share it with everyone as well. It's just an example purpose. Again, highly seeing what I could create from an example of the Bladerunner film, but you guys are more than welcome to dissect both of those examples that I showed.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. We'll post that in the notes, and also we'll post that on the blog post. I'll point out where that will be in a second. And we'll add the link for the download file. Joey's found the link. Here we go. I'll post it here. Thank you, Joey.
You guys are too fast for us.
Yes, exactly. One last thing I wanted to point out before we wrap up is, in fact, in theme with the retro graphics, if you like, was this idea where you could combine a couple of things together to create something unique. And just very quickly, there's a tool inside Universe called Luster. It's inside the Stylize section. And it's really, its job is to create these whole series of nice chrome feel graphics where you can animate and isolate all the different aspects of it and change the highlight and the beveling and all that fun stuff. But we also have the something called AV Club, which is kind of a throwback to the 90s Access TV. And if you've seen the titles for Better Call Saul, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, all about this flickering and this badly keyed chroma and so on. But what's quite interesting is in there, they've got, there's a setting called Source Blocky. And that can actually then reduce your source to give it more kind of this pixelization. And I like to press Shift to get these integers. Let's set it up to something like 8. Here we go. So that if you combine these, let's say you put on Luster for a nice chrome effect with that gradient, and then you put on this Source Blocky with AV Club, then you've suddenly got this kind of retro 8-bit graphic mode without having to spend a long time, say, prepping this in After Effects or in Photoshop. So for me, this is reminiscent of Shinobi and Double Dragon, but I suppose more recently, something like GoldenEye might be a reference for that. But this was another concept about just throwing things together that weren't designed to play together, but actually with a couple of tweaks that they can work quite nicely. Great, so let's just to recap. Thank you for spending this hour with us. As we've discovered through this experience that, as usual, we have far too much content for these topics. And I mean that I've been doing this for many years and I've never learned this, never learned to correct that. But what we'll do, as many of you suggested, let's set up some follow-up sessions where we can jump into not just After Effects, but also some things in cinema where you can combine the two and create some nice fake UI for that. And as many people have mentioned, that wouldn't that be nice to have as a series? So I'll give some serious thought into that and see what we can plan.
Oh, and Simon, I actually have in the project files, if you guys download it, an example of a Cinema 4D OBJ. It's a car model that was referenced by Mir and Form, and you could use that and dissect to kind of see a Cinema 4D workflow throughout the project files if you guys want access to it.
Fantastic. Did it look anything like, here we go, like, here we go. I think I've got an interface element for it here. Where is it?
Yeah, that's the interface. Yes, so the car there is from Cinema 4D, and it's referenced by Mir and the wireframe effects to kind of give it a connection look with a lower density. And you know, in retrospect, the only thing that's changed is the amount of brightness on the car itself and a slight change in color to draw some more attention towards it.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, these links, when we post them, are in this area, the blog that I pointed out at the beginning of the session. And so expect in a few hours time to see some of the download links next to this May 25th Designing FUI heading, but also we'll send you the links in a follow-up email. And if you don't get, if it's not working, send us an email, training@maxon.net, and we'll resend those to you. But I just want to point out something else as well, is that we have a whole series of resources under a small little YouTube channel where these are all 20-second tutorials. And we've got the link inside the follow-up email. In fact, I'll post it now. But it's just interesting to point out that these have lots of the same topics that we were looking at. So if here's another 20-second one on this car example that Nick was talking about. In fact, he uses using one of your cosine expressions in here, Nick, to actually animate this the graphic on the left-hand side up and down without having to create keyframes. But in here are these small little examples. Here's the one that I was talking about earlier on about creating without keyframes and layering that over the eye graphic. Plus that same one that we're mentioning about the opacity curves to enhance which bit of the model you're looking at, and so on and so on. I think we've also got here where is it? Oh, here we are. That one I just showed you, where you can end up with the 8-bit graphic at the end. And in this example, I've just added a bunch of noise to illustrate how poorly it could be composited, perhaps. But in any case, just as a resource, it's worthwhile visiting those, because you can get a chance to be able to just download and play around with some of the source files which are in those links too. Fantastic. So, thank you for the kind comments. And thanks, Joey. The links will be inside in the email or on that blog link, and so on. And just a quick last couple of questions. Just mostly thank you for the session. We appreciate it, really do. And also, I just wanted to finish up with a link for you, Nick, because I really appreciate you hanging out with us in all this month, and for all your hard work putting those various things together. And I just wanted to mention that Nick is co-founder of Creative 111, which is a whole range. And it's just one of the things that you do, Nick. There's a whole range of nice training resources.
Yes, and this is our training site with another fellow After Effects trainer by the name of Ian Robinson. You guys might have heard his voice. He does some of the training directly on the Learn through After Effects, which is kind of awesome. But we're, on a resource-free note, we are going to be loading up some quick YouTube tutorials that are under 90 seconds for using After Effects and Premiere Pro. And I would love to hear some ideas, because part of mine is to also show some workflows through the Cinema 4D and Red Giant universe. So I'd love to hear if you guys would like something specific as well, and I'll make a tutorial. So please feel free to reach out to me. Clips and Handles on Twitter and let me know.
Yeah, we'll add those notes inside the link as well, how to contact both of us. Excellent.
And thanks so much for the comments, guys.
Yes, appreciate it. Thank you. So 9 minutes over, I know, sorry. Yep. There's just too much to fit in. We'll seriously think about that series for FUI stuff. I think that's a great idea. Cool. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, especially if it's a holiday today. Have a great rest of your day. And we've got next week, we're doing modeling using primitives inside Cinema, and we're doing a whole load of Cinema every Monday all through June. So please join us for those too. And you can get those through the main blog link. All right. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Nick, for spending this time with us.
Thanks for having me, Simon. Have a great day, everybody.
Welcome. Yes, thank you. All right. Take it easy. Bye.